In the final days of World War I, the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was an indescribable hell. More than 13,000 bodies were left uncovered. 60,000 prisoners were left to die by starvation and disease. And in this chaos, a group of women were not just watching. They were directly responsible for the atrocities. What they encountered when the British forces liberated the camp was beyond comprehension. But what shocked them most was the presence of the SS. Female guards, Irma Grese, Elisabeth and Johanna Bormann. What turned these women into Belsen executioners? How could they walk among the dead without a drop of remorse? What happened in the trial afterwards changed the way the world viewed the horrors of the Holocaust forever. Would change. But did they really pay the price for their crimes? Architecture of abandonment. Bergen-Belsen. In Death by Neglect, Bergen-Belsen represented a unique model within the Nazi concentration camp system. Belsen, established in 1940 as a camp for prisoners of war, evolved into a deadly complex in 1943 when the SS took partial control of the prisoner of war area, a settlement camp and a prison camp. Thanks to its three-part structure, the Nazi administration was able to meticulously separate its victims according to ethnic, national, and political criteria. Unlike Auschwitz, Belsen did not have gas chambers, but instead developed its own deadly mechanism based on systematic killing by neglect. From 1944 onwards, Joseph Kramer, who would later become known as the Monster of Belsen, took command, and the camp experienced catastrophic overpopulation. Under his rule, the population increased tenfold in 1 year. This overcrowding caused starvation, tuberculosis, typhus, and dysentery. And the real executioners' planned neglect created the conditions in which freedom came immediately. Peaked in the months leading up to the 1940s. Designed to hold 10,000 prisoners, the camp was filled to over 60,000. Survivors described a place where life and death were blurred. Prisoners too weak to move shared space with corpses that had been dead for days. The Nazi regime systematically reduced food rations as the number of cases of disease increased uncontrollably. In April 1945, as British and Canadian forces October 7, 1917. On vital resources for Bormann provided supervision to her. In May 1943, who was only 20 in the camps, which was completely contradictory to her previous values. Bormann was prominent in using animals as instruments of torture. Witnesses stated that she became an extension of her German shepherd's punitive will. During the march back to Auschwitz, a swollen leg came when the prisoner could not keep up with the pace. He ordered his dog to attack. The animal tore the woman apart. She was carried on a stretcher and probably died in another incident. He threw the prisoner by the hair to the ground and let the dog bite her severely. The woman was covered in blood and then sent her to Block 25, which was before the gas chambers. He helped select prisoners for Joseph Mengele's medical experiments in collaboration with the Angel of Death, which took his companionship to another level of horror. When the three women were transferred to Bergen-Belsen in early 1945, the camp's conditions had reached catastrophic proportions. 60,000 prisoners were crammed into facilities designed for 10,000. Epidemics of tuberculosis, typhus, and dysentery had decimated the population. This environment created new opportunities for cruelty. There were no gas chambers, and Belsen death was through starvation and disease. All three guards had adapted to these conditions. Witnesses reported that Gren continued to shoot at random prisoners, Volkenrath continued his pattern of fatal beatings, and Bormann continued to terrorize the weakened women with his dog. What is particularly disturbing about these women's behavior is that they continued to be brutalized even as the German defeat approached. While many guards fled the Allied advance, they remained at Belsen and continued their mistreatment despite the knowledge that they would soon be caught. This persistence suggests a deep identification with their role as torturers, beyond mere obedience to orders or fear of escape. The psychological dimension of the terror they imposed deserves special attention. They not only inflicted physical suffering, but also created a constant atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. The Grampy would whistle softly as he walked around. This seemingly innocent sound would terrify the prisoners because it was a precursor to random acts of violence. By maintaining an expressionless face while inflicting fatal beatings, Bormann created a psychologically devastating contrast to his dog, regarding used fear as a means of control even when the animal was not there. The behavior of these three women is not only the implementation of genocidal policies, but also a personal commentary that exceeded the requirements of the system. Their actions show that the concentration camp environment not only made violence possible, but also encouraged the emergence of sadistic impulses, turning ordinary people into architects of individualized pain. Each developed a personal style of cruelty that distinguished them even in the midst of widespread savagery. The fall of the Belsen guards among the dead, the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, did not follow the usual pattern of other concentration camps, a hostile entry or a surprise. Instead of occupation, strangely negotiated transition took place on April 11, 1945. Heinrich Himmler, anticipating inevitable defeat, allowed the camp to be surrendered without resistance. This pragmatic decision created an unusual scenario. Irma, the SS guards, including Grese Elisabeth Volkenrath and Johanna Bormann, remained in the camp despite the arrival of British and Canadian forces, Allied troops. Belse, when he established a neutral zone around them, the situation they encountered was confusing. The camp commander, Joseph Kramer, was not only still there, but also declared to the British officers that he was staying to maintain order. This declaration was grotesque in the face of the absolute human chaos that reigned in the camp. The three women, the guard, did not escape following this example. The decision to stay can be interpreted in various ways. Perhaps they tried to merge their responsibilities into administrative chaos. Perhaps they thought that escape would mean an admission of guilt, or perhaps they were cut off from the outside world. They did not foresee the magnitude of the consequences. British officer Lieutenant Colonel Marvin Wilkes Gaughnan Belsen, one of the first to enter Belsen, recorded the moment of his encounter with the guards as follows: "We found the commander and staff of the camp still on duty. They seemed to think they were doing a good job under difficult conditions, and expected us to appreciate their efforts when we arrested them. They were visibly shocked when the British entered Bergen-Belsen on April 5." but his mechanical answers were unconvincing in the face of the detailed accounts of many witnesses. Perpetrators challenged ingrained professionalism and efficiency, as the official executioner of the British Crown Point was commissioned by Pierre Point, who later documented these executions in his autobiography, The Executioner. Pierre Point had come to Germany specifically to carry out the sentences given at the Belsen trials. The method chosen was a long fall hanging method devised by the British, which minimized pain and ensured instant death by breaking the neck. This procedure required precise calculations of the length of the rope according to each prisoner's weight and build the day before the execution. Pierre Point and his assistant, Senior Warrant Officer Richard Anthony O'Neill, interviewed each convict to make these anthropometric measurements, Pierre Point documented. The interview with Irma Grese was particularly impressive. When we had finished noting the men's information, the chief warrant officer, Irma Grese, he ordered from his cell and walked towards us smilingly. She looked like a healthy young girl you could wish to meet. She answered Neil's questions but paused and smiled when asked her age. Moment. I realized that we were both smiling along with her, as if we understood a woman's traditional embarrassment about revealing her age. She finally said 21, which is as far as we know. It was true. This interaction showed the disturbing normality that Gren displayed even on the eve of his execution. Pierre Point took his measurements meticulously, recorded that she was 1 meter 65 centimeters tall and weighed 68 kilos. Based on this data, Elisabeth calculated that a fall of 2 meters 24 centimeters was required for instant death. The interview with Walken was more serious. Unlike Gren, Walken was not cheerful. He answered questions in one word and avoided eye contact. His measurements, approximately 1 meter 62 centimeters tall and 65 kilos weight, allowed Pierre Point to determine the required fall distance. Johanna Bormann contrasted markedly with her young friends. Pierre Point described her as an old and pale-looking woman who walked down the corridor, gathering her significantly older than the other convicts. Bormann, aged 52, was in marked distress, shaking as she stepped onto the scales. Pierre Point wrote, and "I have German feelings," is the only statement Perrant recorded of Bormann. This statement reflected a rare moment of human vulnerability from a woman who had shown little compassion for her victims. The executioners on the morning of December 13th, for it started early that day. 11 people were to be executed first, 3 women one by one. Men in pairs. Probably the British authorities decided to execute the women first, in order to minimize the torture of waiting the prisoners endured. At 9:34, Irma Grese was the first person to be hanged. Pierre Point described this moment with technical precision as follows. We climbed the stairs to the cells where the prisoners were waiting. We reached the door that opened into the corridor. A German officer waiting quickly opened the door, and we walked through the corridor lined with faces and entered the execution chamber. The officers were in the position of being at attention. General Patton Walsh had raised his wristwatch in the air. He signaled me, and the sound of a deep breath was heard in the room. Pierre Point continued his narration. I walked towards the corridor. Irma Grese. I called out. The German guards quickly closed the shutters of 12 of the inspection holes, and a door opened. Irma Grese went out. The cell was too small, so she in the corridor. I had to fix it. I said, "Follow me." English that year. The order German repeated the critical second to second. It happened at 9:34 to the execution chamber. Walked to the officers around him for a moment, then walked to the center of the chalk-marked lid on this mark. Stood upright, and when I put the white hood on his head, he said in a low voice, "Schnell. Quick." The lid opened, and the doctor came down into the pit behind me and pronounced him dead. Gre's last word Schnell has been interpreted in different ways: a final challenge, a surrender, or some kind of thought towards his executioners. Whatever it was, this word became his last statement. After a short life of extraordinary cruelty, at 14 o'clock, Elisabeth Woken was brought to the execution chamber. The same procedure was applied. Pierre Point fixed her and directed her to the chalk mark on the lid. Unlike Grace and Woken, Ray's last recorded words were not. The lid opened, and after a calculated fall, he died instantly with a broken neck. to justice. Hidden faces. Minute. He would say, "This is not a holiday resort. It is a work camp for each of you. There is an opportunity. We will take care of Bergen-Belsen trials. The killing of millions of people.